Hey listeners, it's your host, AZ, and I wanted to remind you to get registered for June 24th at 6 p.m. Central, 7-Minute Science. Again, that is Central Time. It's free to register, and you are definitely going to want to be involved. So the link will be in the show notes. Get registered, and we will see you there. I'm really excited for the presenters. This episode, we cut it off at a little over an hour, but I think we could have continued talking for 3 to 5 hours. My guest was Fernando Montes, who is the exercise physiologist for Los Angeles County Fire Department. And he will soon be joining the ranks of retired, but he is still in his position right now. And let me tell you, he has 40 years of experience in human performance, and this man has more knowledge in his little pinky finger than I think a whole boatload of exercise physiologists put together have. He was an amazing guest. And we talked a lot about training recruits and hydration and keeping them safe from heat stroke, heat exhaustion, all of the things. So give the episode a listen. Please share it with someone who could use the information. Give us a rating, give us a review. And for the love of God, if there's a topic you want me to talk about, send me an email and let me know. info@firerescuewellness.org. Have a great day. Now here's Fernando. Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. So I had a walk-in closet with like soundproofing and all of that good stuff. And I sold my house last summer in anticipation of retirement. So now I'm in a rental and it's not as good of sound. But speaking of retirement, tell me more.
Pretty much. 28th of June will be my last day.
That's incredible.
It's an interesting because I've been doing this so long, for 4 decades, and it's time. I mean, at the end of the day, people have been asking me about that stuff, and I said, it's easy to stay a few more years, but I'm also robbing not only myself but my wife and my family of those years that I'm still functional, that I can still do things, that I want to do. And so, deep in your heart, you've been in the industry long enough. You go, it's tough, but I know it's time.
Well, before we go too much further, I want to introduce you to my guest. As fellow soon-to-be retiree, how about that?
Exactly.
Fellow soon-to-be retiree, Fernando Montes, is my guest today on the podcast. And I'm so happy to see your face. Well, it's not technically in person, but it's live, at least. So happy to see you. How are you, my friend?
I am well, AZ. Looking forward to this conversation. It's been a while. We didn't have the time that I wish we had back in I think it was Vegas to chat, but I'm glad we were able to hook up.
Yeah, me too. I'm so excited to have you. And in preparation for the podcast, I usually, print out the bio, and I was printing out your bio and I'm like, holy crap, I want to be Fernando when I grow up. And before we get to the official introduction, I do have to ask you about, so I fancied myself, I wanted to be an FBI agent so badly. And I see that you worked with the FBI hostage rescue team. So jealous. What did you do with hostage rescue?
Well, what happened was at the time I kind of fell into something. It was associated with the Cleveland FBI office, and we became good friends with a lot of the guys, the older guys that were working out of that office. And every FBI group that's in a major city is part of a larger task force. For example, Cleveland would draw in from Youngstown, Akron, Buffalo, and they would have basically what you would call a regional SWAT team. So I got invited to teach at their SWAT school. And then through those connections, I met some of the guys from HRT. And at that time, they were transitioning. They asked me to come out and look at their selection process, and some of the what they call NOTS, new operator training systems. You know, what were they lacking of, and so on. So this was really the ground floor, as I would call it, of human performance entering the FBI world. And so that's how it happened.
I'm in awe. And you know what? It's always connections. It's not networking. Networking doesn't do any good. It's connections.
Right.
I love that.
And it's the relationships, and even to this still to this day, um, I stay in contact with guys that we worked with back in Cleveland, and also with the FBI.
Amazing. All right, before we go down too many rabbit holes, I want to get you introduced though. And
Sure.
I always introduce everybody the same way by making you introduce yourself. I ask you three questions, simple but not easy questions, and then we'll go for there from there. So the first question is, who is Fernando Montes?
Well, person who's been in the human performance, I guess that's the current trend of what we call, for over 4 decades, and it's been a unbelievable journey. When I've done conferences and spoke, my introduction slide is usually a slide of logos where I've actually hung up my jacket or had a locker there. And when you look at it, the first time I used it, it really caught me off guard because I was like, "Holy crap! Look at all the places I've been." And it reminded me of Dr. Seuss, the places we have been, and I've just been blessed. I've been blessed through the thick and thin to have the opportunities not only to serve as an enabler, but a confidant, a coach, a parent, a lot of factors there. But it's just been an unbelievable journey.
And from your bio, if I may, please, looks like you worked in professional baseball in addition
Yes.
to the hostage rescue team, Polk County Sheriff's Department, U.S. men's and women's field hockey casually, the 1984 Summer Olympics. No big deal, right? Pasadena City College, Stanford University, and California State University at Los Angeles. Holy cow, what a pedigree and what amazing opportunities. I'm just so excited for this
Well,
conversation.
thank you. Thank you very much.
So now we know who you are. Tell me what sets your soul on fire in a good way or a bad way. Your choice.
It's a passion. I mean, it's a double-edged sword because it also, on the flip side, is my frustration. Um, as we've worked in fire, as you have, as a firefighter, you know the old saying of firefighters hate the way things are and change. And so, on the flip side of having the passion to provide the best platform for success, you run against the traditional silos, leadership issues, all the things that happen when you work in this particular industry. And so, to me, that's one of the things. It's the balance of that passion versus some of the frustrations.
I always like to say the same thing. Firefighters hate change and the way things are, but also the fire service. 200 years of tradition, unimpeded by progress.
Correct. Correcto mundo. You know.
And it's, you know what? It's everywhere. It's across the country, big departments, small departments,
Mhm.
county, city, doesn't matter.
The fire department reminds me of a saying. It wasn't a saying; it was a poster in the New York Yankees visiting clubhouse, and it said, "Encyclopedia Britannica for sale, lightly used. I just got married. My wife knows everything." And and I kind of put it in jest with fire service in a way because everybody knows our job better than we do.
Oh, for sure.
And I've taken a 5-day course. Now I'm an expert. And
Yes.
what happens is they tend to follow that individual because that person has a badge. And they don't realize the damage and the impedance of success that they create by following that mantra, because it prohibits the growth and the improvement for the masses as well as the future. And so that's one of the biggest challenges right there.
I 100% agree. In fact, I just got off another call where I was interviewed on a podcast and we dug into that a little bit, that whole train the trainer model. And we'll probably dig into that a little bit today too. But first, I want to know, how are you changing the world?
One individual at a time. We talked about networks and relationships. I call it relationships. I just recently spoke at a high school career day, and the principal and I, our roots go back to mid '90s when he came in as an intern when I was with the Cleveland Indians, and now he's a principal and asked if I would come in and share some experiences. It's just relationships. That's the thing, is we build relationships throughout our career, and it's not always in the same arena, but it's touching other people.
I have the benefit right now of seeing you on video. I don't share video with my podcast listeners, but I am seeing what looks to be some data research, something behind you, which is what initially drew me to you, is that you are participating in so much research. But before we go kind of down that path, tell me about, how did you get to be in your position for Los Angeles County Fire?
Well, funny thing is, I applied for this job. There was a job open, or a job announcement, and I had applied. And I had just left about a year prior. I had left working as a government contractor, a military contractor, working at Fort Carson in the Thor program. And I was, we were in New Jersey, my wife and I received a phone call, and they asked if I was interested in interviewing for this job. And I'm like, what job? I totally forgot that I had applied. So they said to me, said, well, we could do it on the phone. I said, no, I'll fly to California and interview. And so I came out, interviewed. Um, 2 weeks later, I was offered the position. And the funny thing is, we talk about how things happen for a reason and relationships. Um, the day that I received the call, we were talking about the whole job, and I'd asked the captain at the time, and I said, "What's the reload package?" And he goes, "There is no reload package." And we're like, "Okay." I said, "Can I take 24 hours and I'd like to have a conversation with my wife?" And I said, it's not negative. I said, I think we'll be fine, but we want to make sure that we're all on the same sheet of music. So hung up, and within 10 minutes, I get a second phone call, and it's a friend of mine who we had done some work together on the contracting side, and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I just kind of going through this process with my wife, referenced a job potentially in California." He goes, "When do you start?" I go, "I don't know. I haven't officially accepted." He says, "Well, tell him you can show up on April 1st." I said, "Why?" He says, "I got a job for you for the next 30 days. We're going to do some support work with Naval Special Warfare." And he goes, "I can pay, X." And I'm like, "Perfect. It pays my reload." Called the guy back, and I says, "I got the job. Can I start on such a date? I'll be there." And he goes, "No problem." So we literally came cross country. I dropped my wife off at her cousin's, and I took off to Ventura for 30 days in support of a Navy culmination exercise, which was phenomenal experience working in that situation. And then I ended up here in LA County.
I love that story. And what year was that?
2000, and was it 14? I think it was 14.
Okay. And then was this an initial position or was this an opening? Someone else had been in your position prior?
The position, we have two positions here. One is the coordinator, fitness for life coordinator, which is a badge position held by a captain slot, and then you have the SME in here in my position as a physiologist. Um, this was created through the WFI, the Wellness Fitness Initiative, way back. LA County is part of the original task force, the 10 cities in the task force. So we supported that building of the Wellness and Fitness Initiative. And the person that was in this position, who had retired at the time, uh, did a lateral transfer from the big county, from the health side of the big county. So he was an exceptional physiologist in the lab, but he had very limited field experience because that wasn't his forte. And flip side, I'm not a lab rat as much, but I've been in the field most of my life. So it was a perfect transition, and they were looking for um, an upgrade in everything that they were trying to establish. So I got tossed into the fodder.
Welcome from the frying pan to the fire.
Exactly.
Glad you're here. That's amazing. So I guess I knew that your department was one of those original wellness and fitness initiative departments, but I completely forgot about that. So let's dig into that just a little bit because from my understanding, and you can probably clarify for me, the whole wellness and fitness initiative kind of got started because the fire service realized, holy moly, we're losing our firefighters to complications of cardiovascular disease. We have to do something. And then it sort of, in my opinion, it evolved a little bit, but then it seems to have stalled out from my perception. But talk to me from the perception of the department, one of the departments it came from.
Well, you are 100% correct. It was around the sudden cardiac events that were taking place throughout the country with firefighters. Now, one caveat that we found out in doing some background research on the start of this was they were lumping together the data of uh, the volunteer fire departments as well as the paid fire departments, which is as you well know, a volley versus a paid position can be A to Z, as far as their ability, their to do perform, and let alone their physical capabilities. So that was the initial alarm, the first alarm that went off. And in the conversation, they looked at the fitness side, but they also looked heavily at the physiological side. So that's why, hence, they recommended a physiologist because again, they were worried about the cardiovascular stuff. And I think early on, that's where the first mistake was made because they didn't take a step back and go, okay, what is the approach we need to take? It needs to be more of a holistic where we're at today, where you have a team of people. If you look at the growth of what I would consider human performance in the fire service, South Metro up in Colorado, just knocking it out of the park. Unbelievable.
Shout out to South Metro.
Yep, I'm their biggest fan, and yeah, that's the model. That's where the WFI should be, and it's kind of, to me, it's wrapped up in quagmire, and the fact that people think it's easy if you're in a sports background. We talk about program design. That's a 52-week program template that's generated around originally the Olympic movement. And in reality, when you talk about fire, it's not a 52-week plan. It's a 30-year career plan. How do you create that? And I don't have that answer because people like yourself have that answer. What we need to do is draw that out and go, okay, walk us through the start. I know for a fact that we have to do a better job in the recruitment. We got to do a better job in the training early on because we missed that opportunity to start to fix the warts, to improve their mobility, to do all the right things while they're going through the training tower. Because once they get into the field, you've lost that ability to do that. Plus, you have to have that ability to engage, get them into a program that's now is part of your total philosophy. So that to me is where we went south. And the sad part, going back to our encounter in Vegas, I had applied to do a talk in Virginia Beach this year at the next TSAC, and that was my thought process was let's do an interactive with a panel and put together a 30-year career. How do we do that? Let's bring in the tactical people who understand, who are training them, and let's bring in the people like yourself. And unfortunately, it was rejected.
It's okay. My proposal was rejected too. But also, I have presented the last 5 years, so I get it that you can't present every year. Um, I love what you said because it's not a 52-week performance plan, because that in itself is a lot. It's a 30-year plan. And now let's go back to what many departments are expecting from their peer fitness trainers. How in the world would a peer fitness trainer ever be able to do a 52-week plan, let alone a 30-year plan?
Exactly, and there's a former professor, SME in the world of strength and conditioning, Mel Sif, out of South Africa. And in one of Mel's books, he put out a statement that I live by to this day. Any fool can train a fool for at least 1 year, and that's what we see. Um, the challenge is we have to become better salesmen, salesperson to management, because without the support of management leadership, you constantly are hitting roadblocks. Because the difference in what's happened in Colorado is their leadership is sold 100%. So without that, that's your start. Checking a box is not the start, and unfortunately, we've checked the box. And you need that. You need that ability to have leadership, executive level, um, visible to understand what we're dealing with. Because again, we're the enablers, we're the subject matter experts who are setting the table for the future of this department. And the other thing that it's been on my battle cry for the last 5 years. I was fortunate a couple of years back to speak at a DoD conference on human performance, and it was all either contractors or DoD personnel only. And so General Hubbard was the keynote speaker who was in charge of recruit training, first initial training in the U.S. Army. He was a keynote, and he said 71% of America's youth cannot get through the door of the U.S. Army.
Mm-mm-mm.
And I
So
remember
not good.
coming back and talking to our people. I go, it's coming. What are we doing to prepare for that? And again, deaf ears. Right now, that number is at 78 to 80%. They can't get through. The U.S. Army now is running a preparatory school just to get into basic training. We're not paying attention to that. So the fire world, the community that you and I work in or have worked in, is going to be in a dire straits within the next 10 years because they're already here. We have a recruit class going through right now that's in probably the third phase. Out of 56, they've already dropped 22 bodies. That financially is almost just slightly below or at $500,000.
And that statistic that you just gave, the 78% that can't get through the door for the military, we're all fishing from the same pond.
Exactly. They're showing up at our door, and we have to take a step back and we got to look at what do we have or what can we put together in order to prevent that level of dysfunction and prevent it from entering the fire service where it's going to fail.
It's interesting. My friend sent me a little video on Instagram this morning, and I'm not great with the movies, especially the comedies, but it's Ben Stiller,
Mm-hmm.
and it might be from Dodgeball. I'm not sure, but he's just He's running around and doing all this crazy fitness stuff. And the caption is every station has this guy putting together your workouts.
Without a
And there
doubt.
was a comment. This is so good. Why is it so hard to understand that exercise science is a whole ass degree and people doing random shit they think is hard is negligent?
Without a doubt.
Drop the mic.
Exactly. And what's funny is I have a good friend of mine who since has retired from the LA County Sheriff's Department. And we had this standing joke of we're going to start up our own semi law firm or subject matter experts for law firms, saying if you get kicked out of an academy, we'll get you right back in because we know the pinch points, of what questions to ask and so on. And it's funny because I had a phenomenal experience with our wildland division, and people freaked out because he goes, they normally don't let people come into that world. That's kind of a closed off world. But I remember one time having a captain, and we kind of uh, bucked heads a little bit about a traditional run that they would do at the end of training day. And we'd been working up in Santa Clarita, and temperatures had been averaging 103 during the work week. And we were running wet bulb, and I talked to the captain. I says, you can't run them. And he's like, why? We always do it. I says, let me explain to you. I says, we're in the black right now. Now, if you want to put them back in their gear, put their rooks on them, we go out and tool. And if one of them dies, you know what? We're following a set protocol. And unfortunately, things sometimes happen. We can defend that. It's sad, but we could defend that because we're doing real world training. We're operating under the guidelines. We're doing wet bulb assessments and so on. But if you decide to run them on this course and someone goes down, there is nothing in this world that I can do to protect you because you will take the hit for this. And everything you have, you're going to lose. And it was a Kodak moment because at that moment, that discussion never came up again. They always, every day, was like, "What's our wet bulb today? What's our, how's the crew? Are they physically okay today?" And there was some grumbling, but they finally understood that my job not only to protect the trainees that were going through the process, but to protect the cadre from themselves.
Question for you. I have always imagined that if a peer fitness trainer or a cadre leading physical fitness had a bad outcome, let's say a rhabdo or a death,
Mm-hmm.
I have always imagined that would ultimately fall back on the department, not the individual leading the exercises. But am I correct in that assumption? Or is it going to be shared responsibility?
Well, it's going to be a couple of ways. Traditionally, they're going to go after the county first because they got the bigger pockets.
Yeah.
Okay, so attorney's going to do that automatically. But one of the first things the county would do is they're going to look at your job description and they go, Az, what is your job description? And you go down the line, you do all these things. They go, well, it doesn't say anything about you have an education in this particular endeavor. It doesn't say that you're a trainer. It doesn't say you're a strength coach. It doesn't say that's not your job. Who said you were responsible for doing that? And what the county will do is now they're separating themselves away from you as the individual because you're working outside of your job description. That's the system's way of protecting itself. Once you work outside your job description, you're on your own. So therefore, you start to take on that responsibility, and there's nothing that says that they can't come at you civil.
So even though the county or the city or the municipality assigned that to me, if it's not in my job description, I might be in trouble for what happens.
Correct. I have a good friend of mine. He's actually getting ready to retire from our department, and he's always poked our training division in the ribs, going, "If my son went through this academy and he failed out, I guarantee in 24 hours he'd be back in." Because question is, you have that man sitting in his office and you're not utilizing him. Why?
You mentioned wet bulb, and I'm familiar with that, but I have a feeling maybe some of the listeners wouldn't be familiar with that. So what in the heck does that mean?
Well, wet bulb gives us. Well, let's backtrack a little bit for the audience. As you well know, and some of the audience that work in fire, uh, weather and what we call spinning weather or gathering weather data is huge in fire operations, especially if you're working in the wildland, or what we call the WUI, the urban wildland interface. Southern California, Northern California, and so on. I mean, we're a big wildland department in a lot of ways because of the surrounding terrain. Weather creates different behaviors with fire, fire height or fire length, and we've seen some crazy types of fire behavior in the last 5 to 10 years. With that said, um, it's very common what they call low spin weather and give weather reports every half hour. What we do is we use wet bulb, which is traditionally used by the military. It's used by OSHA. It's used by the NFL and athletic trainers across the country. And it's basically to understand what everything from humidity, heat index, actual heat, all those put together give you a set, we call warning or a condition. And what that tells you is what is the atmospherics doing to the human body? What additional stress is the human body going under? With those stresses also comes work rest ratios. So if we are heavy in the black, and this has always been kind of the argument within the fire service, he goes, well, we got to fight the fire regardless. I says, yes, you do, without a doubt. What the wet bulb gives you is a little more understanding of what you need to do adjustment wise in reference to your personnel. That's it. Fire will always dictate the intensity of work, the immediate needs, and so on. But when available, you need to pull back and let your people recover based upon the additional stress put on their bodies. And it also plays when you're talking about a structure fire, for example, because the equipment that they're encapsulated with is even worse.
Amen. That equipment is the worst. I like to say it saves my life and is actively killing me at the same time.
Correct.
So a take-home message for this is when we're fighting a fire, sometimes we have to do what we have to do. We're going to consider rest when we can. But for training especially, we're not going to push past those margins of sensibility. Am I right?
Correct. When you are operating in an academy environment, whether it's wild land or structure, we control the right and left limits. We have all the safety situations put in play. In the real world, those are not there. So you hope that through this process, you're teaching people how to understand the physiological aspects of the job and how those internal, external factors play on the individual, and what is the ramifications as well as the remedies when you are working in the red or the black or so on. And it's just in the world of performance, it's about load management.
I have so many things that I want to talk to you about. Can we just book you for a 2 and a 3 and a 4 now?
Sure, why not? Run it.
I want to get maybe your perspective on something. I'm going to speak in big generalities,
sure,
but out of necessity. There's a particular training academy that I'm familiar with that has had historically, I'm not talking once or a couple times, but historically has transported candidates to the hospital with rhabdo, like full blown. And you and I know that this is a big, big deal. But also it keeps happening. And in professional and collegiate and even high school sport, we've seen examples of players who have either gotten rhabdo or died, and then the coaches or the strength coaches or whatever being held responsible. So I guess if you were able to just take the mic over and talk directly to this academy or these academies that are having this issue, what would you say and where would you start?
First and foremost, it's twofold. I would start at what is their physical performance level? Where do they start? So you have to have a baseline of where your personnel are at. Second of all, you have to have a plan, and that plan goes back. We laugh about the 52-week plan. You have to plan accordingly and build your load accordingly. The stress load that you're going to provide for these individuals. Where we see rhabdo is too fast, too soon, too many times, lack of recovery, and they're just boom. They're doing programs that don't fit. You know, University of Oregon had a big issue a couple of years ago. Where they were doing all this crazy back to the military style training, and they lose sight of these aren't Navy SEALs. These aren't, recruits. They're different personnel, and you have to train them accordingly. Number one, you get a recruit class come in, you have no idea what their level is, none whatsoever. In their world, and this is where our data has come in. We've run both in our wildland and our structure academies. We've done heart rate variability using omega wave, and we look at training windows of opportunity. But one of the things that sticks out in both sides is the lack of recovery in the power. Because even someone who has been training for entrance into an academy, into the fire service, no one's ever said you got to do repetition when you're in an academy. So therefore, power and the replication and recovery has not been trained, and therefore they tend to start to break down in those areas. So it's truly understanding two sides. One is what is the current window of trainability in your group of individuals as well as a group. What is their data showing you, and what adjustments do you have to make in your training? As you have already laid out a template for that training, I have to be able to go, wait a minute, this is a good plan, but it's not for this group. I need to make an adjustment. I need to spend more time on something else because the data that we've collected on them shows us that this is where they lack. So therefore, why am I training in power when they can't move? So let's go back to our basics and start moving first. So again, it goes back to where they're at. How are you going to get them to the next phase? What's your next phase? And having the ability to adjust. Now, the one thing rhabdo has become I don't want to call it a junk term, but when you look at the numbers, you go to any training facility in this country, whether it's collegiate, professional, or so on, and if you were to do samples on everybody right after doing a heavy workout day, whether it's a conditioning day or running sleds or heavy lifting, heavy back day, um, their CK numbers are going to be high. Clinically, a doctor's going to say they got rhabdo. If you look at any of the older traditional Eastern Bloc country training manuals around the Olympic movements, you'll see that rhabdo has been mentioned in those books because it was common. That's part of the recovery process. You've torn tissue down. There's been some excessive work. Now there's a recovery. We're just really starting to catch up to the recovery mode that the Eastern Bloc countries for years were doing way ahead of us. you know. So, to answer your question, it's where are they at? What's my plan? And what adjustments do I have to make based on the initial assessment?
Sounds like a job for not a firefighter.
Yeah, it's a little out there, but hey, if you got that 5-day certification, we can find you a job.
Absolutely. So I want to start digging because you have so many topics, fascinating research topics, and I have a feeling that some of these are tied together. So I'm wondering if we can sort of dive into your research on exertional heat illness. And I suspect that kind of ties in with the saliva testing and the oral rehydration. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. and hydration protocols. Let's start breaking all of that down in terms that a department can go, oh, here's what we need to consider.
Okay. When I first started, um, one of our battalion chiefs who was overseeing our wildland division, we met, Chief Inman and I sat down, and they were at a crossroad. Um, they were losing, up to 50% of their classes of personnel in their academies because of heat illness. And most common, you'd get sent to the ER, and the ER doctor would say, okay, we're going to put a couple bags in you and see me in 10 days. Well, our academy for our wildland is 21 days. So you basically, you're done. So not only were we losing a candidate or candidates, but financially, our investment, we weren't getting our return on investment. So he invited me in, and it was funny because, again, like, who's this guy? What's he doing? So I started asking questions, and one of the funny things was they were doing weigh-ins, weigh outs, and I said, okay, where's that data? Because, well, it's in the box.
The
Do you,
box?
do you guys look at it? And they go, no, but we just do it just in case we get investigated. So I'm like, okay. So I started asking questions, and we had no process. We had no means to establish the unknown. Let's take the unknown, make it known. And what is our protocol? So, with that said, is what we created was what I call the hydration triangle, and it was built upon the use of a urine-specific gravity refractor. So everyone who's worked in athletics or the fire service will see a urine chart above the urinal and say, "Hey, how are you? Are you hydrated today?"
I have so
Right?
many questions about that chart.
And so the question is, how many times do you actually practice it? And everybody goes say, "No, I don't practice it." So that was the other piece. So for every day of our academy, they're physically going to evaluate their own urine. We're going to do weigh in and weigh out. So we're going to look at body mass loss. We're going to look at the color of their urine, and we're going to look at urine specific gravity, which is going to give us the actual hydration number. Now, the reason we created this triangle was during the academy, we control those factors. When you leave the academy, you're leaving the USG. You still have a scale, you still have a visual. Now, you've done 21 days, so you're pretty good to be able to identify your color urine based against your USG. So we have a learning experience. Now, once you get sent out on an out of county assignment, the weight scale goes out, but you still have the ability to look at your urine because you've done enough evaluations and felt the stress that you at least have a baseline level of knowledge of how to maintain your own level of hydration. That's the testing side. The next phase was we were looking for products at the time, everything came together at the right time. And we had a specific format that we wanted to see. We wanted to see the research, wanted to know, did you pay for your own research? We wanted samples. We wanted to know who's using it in the industry and how does it taste, because that was a big factor. There was a product out there at the time that NASA was using, and it's a phenomenal product. It's called the Right Stuff.
Oh,
But
that stuff tastes terrible.
exactly, and it tasted horrible. My days back at the collegiate level, the Buffalo Bills, they drank Pedialyte all the time. So did we. I mean, we would pass out Pedialyte popsicles like they were going out of style. But we were looking for a product that would be able to be used at the farthest end of that hose, that farthest line that's being constructed by a hand crew. So at that time, Drip Drop had popped up into our world, and so we started looking at that product. We talked with their scientists, we talked with their actual doctor who created it. And it was originally being used in the humanitarian world, and so we started to use that. So we started collecting data. We started looking at protocols. There was a naval doctor, Dr. Onifer, who was at that time working with Marine MARSOC, or the Special Ops side of the Marine Corps, and he was doing some research also. So we were able to touch bases with him and share some notes. So basically, what happened was we were able to establish some protocols and monitor our protocols. We had a system where, as you came in every day, you brought in your urine. You were able. We didn't do the testing; they did. It was an educational component to this. So they're testing their own urine. We are establishing their unknown hydration status. Whether you're pre-hyponatremic, you're good to go, you're mild, serious, or significant, significant, serious, excuse me. Then we created protocols to go with that. On the other side of that was we had to understand or teach that the human body is only going to be able to absorb 1.5 liters plus or minus fluids per hour. So we wanted to make sure that the product that we're relying on to get them to a level ready to go, toes on the line, is not being diluted, because everybody's so uh, dehydration conscious. There's like hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Well, every morning we had 1 hour, and our 1 hour window was to get them ready for toes on the line. So what we monitored over basically 10 years was a protocol based upon that triangle. And during the course of 10 years, I can honestly say we had two heat illnesses that were truly heat illnesses that got got through the system. Two in 10 years in an academy environment that we monitored.
Wow.
And that didn't mean that we didn't have kids spin up during, but following our protocols, getting them back into the fight, we could get that done. And we have the data to back that quote.
And that's hundreds of candidates, I would imagine, at
Uh,
least hundreds.
I was close to finishing up my last class, just shy of 5,000 data points.
Dang. That's incredible. And so, with your monitoring triangle, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and the protocol you developed for oral rehydration, you improved the odds exponentially on losing a candidate. That's incredible.
Correct. And then the downstream side of it was an individual, and we always preach this because a candidate would start with 96 ounces of fluids at the start of their training day. They carried two 1 quart canteens. They had a 16-ounce flask with drip drop or their electrolyte replacement. And then they also had 16 ounces of carbohydrate drink. So at any given time, they had the capabilities throughout the course of their training to not only hydrate with fluids, they had electrolytes and they had carbohydrates to help do their process. The goal was once they left the academy, that's where they were truly going to learn hydration, because it boils down to I am now carrying what I need. I don't have Fernando in his truck and the water stations everywhere. And so that's where our end point was, is we're building toward that crescendo of it. Now you're stepping into the new world. Here you go. And don't forget your fluids.
Don't
And
forget.
so this was all designed so that it becomes now part of the culture in the field. And in reality, if you go down and you work for LA County, you go down with a heat illness, it's on you. It really is, because we provide you everything that you could think of to maintain a capability in the field.
Amen. Preach it louder. So, I think I've had Megan Louts on the podcast approximately 50 times now, but no, I think it's 4 times. But I know she talked about drip drop, and I know she also, I asked her the same question, but I think it never hurts for the listeners to hear the good information more than once. But Fernando, I'm so afraid of carbohydrates. Should I just get the drip drop without the sugar?
Well, yeah, we get bombarded with all kinds of products, and everybody's got a new Wazoo product. And we stay to our stance of number one. The goal is we want to get that maximum capability or that individual back into the fight as best as possible, or provide them the best care in the event that they do go down. With that said, sugar is part of that concept. It helps get that into the system as fast as possible. The amount of sugar. Now, the question boils down to, are you going to be worried about sugar or the fact that you are now going into heat stroke on the ground? Which one do you want? A little later or sooner? And it's just a lack of understanding of what is the true 3,000-foot view of this process. The process is to provide the best environment for a person to be successful, whether it's physical, physiological, mental, whatever. And this particular piece of that puzzle is keeping them well hydrated and reducing the potential for exertional heat illness. Because as we know, you can go from a simple "I feel dizzy" to a heat stroke in a heartbeat. And there's also, when we go down that rabbit hole, there's also bad information on how to treat in the field someone who's potentially is having a heat stroke, let alone testing them after the fact to say, are they ready to come back? And we can talk about that a little bit more. But back to your question, we get that a lot in reference to, oh, it's got the sugar. Okay, you know what? Half the stuff you drink has sugar. Again, this is not about your nutritional status. This is about potentially an emergency situation. This is about being fire ready and the amount of sugar you're going to have. Now, you're not sitting in the fire station drinking drip drop all day. We don't we don't badmouth Gatorade. Gatorade is still in our system. We've reduced the sugar in it. We have low sugar, or we have non-sugar Gatorade, and we promote that. Hey, you can, when you're in the station, drink one. But on that rig, there should be, depending on, we run three-man rigs, generally speaking, is there should be a preloaded bottle on ice in that rig. Because at any given time, the heat illnesses that we have had in the past, when you go back and you start to peel back the onion, it's that person just showed up on shift. He's got a cup of coffee in him. He goes, oh, I'll have breakfast in a few minutes. Maybe he's been in Vegas the weekend before, or he's coming off, he's worked a double. They go out to a battalion drill. Hey, we're heading to get coffee after, and boom, they get toned out to a 3-alarm structure or a 3-alarm commercial. They go up on roofing vent operations, and within 30 seconds, they're spun out. Now, people immediately goes like, oh, we have this problem. Well, again, go backwards. When did the problem actually start? It started because the person wasn't fire ready when they started their shift. So having that product available and understanding how it works is critical. And again, if people want to go, I want one with no sugar. You know what? We'll get you one. Tell me how that works down the line.
Oh my gosh, you're awesome. So I want to, you said that we could dig into treating in the field. Are you
Yes.
okay on time?
Oh, you have all the time you want.
All right, let's dig into that topic. And then I'm going to save this entire list of other things for part 2. So, talk about treating those heat related illnesses, some of the trip points, and also what can we do to make sure that we are successful in the field.
Well, one of the key things to understand, someone who is suffering heat stroke, minutes are critical. They are cooking. They are in an oven, and that oven doesn't stop until you start to change the physiological response that's taking place in their body. You have to start to offload the heat. And one of the things I noticed was the way we would immediately transport, and they would use a burn sheet, the old egg crate burn sheet, put the person down and douse them in water, and that was it. And then they would transport. Well, we go back some years to the Corey Stringer Institute, and the injury that Corey Stringer took on, or actually passed away from, was a heat stroke injury during training camp with the Minnesota Vikings. Hence, they started the Corey Stringer Institute at the University of Connecticut. And so they really started that whole process of understanding how to properly treat in the field. And the NATA has been 100% behind it and have really done a great job of teaching people. The military's done a phenomenal job. And again, it's understanding all the resources out there to figure out, okay, what is the best for us? So if we take a quick glimpse at what happens at probably 6 to 10 military installations every year, especially during the summer months, is Fort Benning's a great example. They'll have heat casualties left and right. And the best mechanism for transport is literally the ambulance service that's based at Fort Benning. They have it down to a science. They literally can stand up in the back of their rig and continue the dousing of cold fluids onto the individual as possible while it's going to the hospital, to the emergency room there. You take, for example, if you're in an austere environment in one of their training environments and you don't readily have ice sheets available out in the field, they can get a medevac helicopter to basically drop you what they call a speedball packet, where they've dumped a duffel bag to you. It's got ice, it's got water, it's got sheets, and you can start that right there. But the golden rule is you should not transport until their core temperature is at 102. Now, when we talk about core temperature, that freaks people out because you go, what do you mean? You got to get core, like, yes, we do. And it's amazing to watch grown men just freak out.
I'm
And,
squirming right now.
you
I'm
know, and
squirming.
because they think that this temperature gauge is the size of this water bottle. It's not, but it's critical because again, the damage to the body is happening in minutes, and the longer you are under heat until we get that body down to 102, that's the most critical point because not only are you frying the brain and running the potential of death, but you're also damaging the hypothalamus. So you're attacking the computer and you're attacking the thermostat. And that is factual. The longer you stay under heat, internal core temperature above 104 to 5 degrees, you potentially running into a thing known as heat intolerance for a firefighter, where putting on your turnouts could kill you. And we've had somebody go through that process. But the key thing is number one, we should never transport until we have their core temperature down to 102. And the mechanisms, depending on your scenario, can be everything from using a tarp and what they call a taco method to ice sheets, which the military uses quite often. We've used a thing called polar skin, which is a very good tool to have that you can move around and you basically can continuously to offload heat by switching sheets and continuously keeping them cold. There's a number of techniques that you can use, but the thing is it's got to be taught and it's got to become part of the culture because again, minutes are critical when it comes to not only saving the person's life but also reducing the potential long-term effects of that heat stroke.
Are you using in the field in LA County the oh, I just hit my knuckle. That hurt. Are you using the palm cooling method where you put the ice packs in the palms and on the soles of the feet?
No, we've actually done the arm immersion. In training environments, we'll have arm immersion set up. At the academies, they also we've put in dunk tanks where they actually have the large cattle troughs in the event that they have to put somebody in there. Um, when we're running, excuse me, when I'm working in a wildland academy, I'll carry I have what we call an easy lounge chair where I can actually recline them back, and then I have the polar skin capability. So we'll start off heating them right there until we get them down.
And you mentioned that you can actually, so to speak, put your thermostat um, out of kilter. Is it possible that having little bouts of not heat stroke, but we'll just say heat exhaustion, maybe having multiple bouts of that could also make you more sensitive to heat? Asking for a friend.
Well, potentially, you don't know what you don't know, and so the simplest way to establish a known when it comes to a heat illness potential moderate to severe heat illness is to have them heat tested or heat tolerance tested. And right now, there's only, well, University of Montana, Dr. Brett Ruby, they have one. They normally don't test people per se. They do testing for themselves. It's research. The Navy, U.S. Navy, has a facility in San Diego. Uh, I think the Corey Stringer Institute has one, and then Fresno State. Um, and the key there is to put somebody into a heat chamber. It's 104 degrees, I think, 40% humidity. You get on a treadmill. They have a core temperature on you. They have a heart rate monitor on you, and the test starts. And I want to say it starts at 2% grade and gradually increases. So what they're looking for is to see your heart rate goes up and your core temperature goes up at the same time. If you've been damaged, what will happen is within a few seconds your heart rate starts to go up and your core temperature starts to go up. Okay. Now, the experts on heat tolerance testing are actually the Israeli army, the RDF. They have been the leaders in research, and they've conducted it quite often. The Navy does it for the Marine Corps, and they will not test anybody for 8 weeks prior or post injury. They feel that the body needs at a minimum 8 weeks to recover. So if that person that we're talking about has had a moderate to say semi touchy feely severe and hasn't recovered or hasn't been allowed to 8 weeks plus or minus, and sometimes it's even longer, it could be 16 weeks, um, that they potentially have developed some heat intolerance. We had an individual here that had, he since has retired, but called me out of the blue. And that's how we started this whole process of understanding heat intolerance. Um, we're good in the industry of understanding the front side, how to hydrate, how to monitor, and so on, and do some treatment. But we don't have what we would call the return to work program when it comes to this. And this individual, unknowns to us, had a heat stroke, had been hospitalized, had returned to work again because sometimes departments work in silos and they don't talk to each other. This individual was working a mild brush fire, and they were in mop phase and went down a second time. So he calls me in a sheer panic and goes, "Someone told me to call you. Here's my information, and what do we do?" So I said, we're good at the front side, we're not good at the back side. Let's research this. So hence the dirt diving into it, and that's where we came up with protocols out of Israel, talked to the Navy, talked with Fresno State. Now, the ironic part that took place in this, and this is kind of a thorn in my side a little bit, is we prepped for this. We had it all set up. My overhead said, you know, get your transportation set, go get this guy tested. 24 hours before we were supposed to go, he calls me up and says, "You can't go." I'm going like, "What do you mean I can't go?" Because you can't go. The union doesn't want you there. So the union prevented me from taking care of one of their own personnel. And so that not only has been a thorn in my side, but that individual, from what I understand, was heat intolerant. That meant that he had enough heat, he was under enough heat for a period of time that it damaged his hypothalamus, screwed up the thermostat, and there was nothing that we could do to change that. Therefore, putting on heavy turnouts would literally potentially kill you.
Yikes. And also relatable.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the longer I got around in my career, the more intolerant I became of just even a little bit of heat. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm gonna let you off the hook for today for part one. I think we should, but I need to know though. I always want to talk about dogs. Do you have a
Oh,
dog,
yes.
Fernando? Tell me about your dog.
Well, we just inherited a new puppy.
Inherited? How
Yeah,
nice.
Muttley is a 16-week, now he's 60 pounds, 62-pound Newfoundland slash St. Bernard.
How in the hell do you inherit a dog that big?
Well, it was introduced to our family from a relative that was a friend of a friend, had a rescue system, and there was a series of puppies that they needed homes for. And my wife talked me into rescuing Muttley, as we call him. And he's a character. I don't know. I don't.
How big is that dog gonna get?
He's going to be a big guy. As you well know, Newfoundland in our Newfies are not small dogs.
No.
Let's see here. Let's see if I can get it.
Good Lord. Listeners,
That's
that dog,
Muttley.
Muttley, is a monster. His feet are bigger than my head.
He's a character. He is a
Well,
character. So he brings joy to the afternoon. Like, okay, Dad's home. Let's start playing.
yeah. Well, when you move, when you relocate, will you have like property or?
Yes.
Okay.
We're moving back to Pennsylvania. We have 10 acres to run
Perfect.
around in, and I'll have plenty to do.
Yeah, Muttley, go do some hot laps, honey. Just go run off some of that energy.
I got to make sure he learns how to carry a 6-pack. So if I go down, I come over and see Dad.
Bring the 6-pack and the drip drop.
Exactly. Bring a drip.
There's a protocol for this. Well, Fernando, this has been over an hour and it went by like a snap of the finger. So once you're settled back in Pennsylvania, I'm going to be bothering you again to reach out to talk about some more of your research and some how retirement is, of course.
My pleasure. It's again. I was looking forward to having this conversation, and you know, I listen to your podcast and stuff, and it's awesome work, and I appreciate the fact that you're out there, you know, knocking down doors and having some great people talk and making a difference in the service, you know, and especially for somebody who's been in it, and I commend you wholeheartedly. It's a blessing, and you are blessed because you're touching people every day, and you're giving back, and that in itself is unique. And you know, we love you for that. I think I can speak for your audience. We love you for the fact that you are doing the Lord's work there and carrying that bucket.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And I don't know if you know this yet, but I am starting my PhD. Did I tell you?
Oh, pile high and deep, huh?
Yeah, with Jay Dawes at Oklahoma State. Here I come.
J Dawes.
Yes.
I
Can you
know old
imagine the
Jay.
two of us? Yes, the two of us taking over the world.
Good for you. Good for
So,
you.
thanks. More to follow on all of that. But think
what are you
go
going to
ahead.
focus on? What are you going to focus on?
Oh, so glad you asked. First of all, it's in the health and human performance area of the college. And I'm sure you're aware that there are these pockets of firefighters throughout the country that are really pushing doing physical fitness training while wearing structural firefighting gear. Yeah. And so I'm going to look at it from two angles. The first, the biomechanical impacts of the way the gear restricts your movement and potentially the heat portion of it. And then the second part is the unnecessary exposure to the carcinogens and the PFAS and all of that kind of stuff. So kind of two arms of the same study getting started in August.
Good for you. It's funny because I made there was a picture on LinkedIn that had 3 firefighters and some stairmasters, and they were in full gear, and there was a lady next to them, and there was all these comments, and I sent a comment like, really? I hope your gear is clean, because you just contaminated not only that apparatus, but the lady next to you.
And even if the gear is quote unquote washed, it's still full of PFAS.
Exactly. Plus, you know, what about your boots? Did you wash your boots? You know,
no.
I mean, so it's just a false sense, you know. And I'll tell you a quick story. We changed our turnouts, which are more protective from an encapsulation standpoint. So we started issuing out new turnouts. Well, guys were just heating up left and right. And some of the guys were actually cutting out the vapor barriers and stuff like that because they were just too hot.
Oh,
Well,
damn.
and again, goes back to the whole silo methodology. Is the right's not talking to the left? Now, what has transpired, but no one ever asked, was how does this affect performance, firefighting operations? Well, it'd have been simple. All you got to do is put a cord tablet, put some recording information on somebody, run them through a burn container, do some stuff like that. Same person do the same thing in different turnouts, and there it is. Voila! It's a quick down and dirty. Here's the data that shows. Guess what? Our new turnouts increase heat too fast. Therefore, now operationally, I need to be an adjustment on my using of personnel. I need to get my people out sooner than keeping them in based on the bottle. Again, simple thought process, but you know, it was hidden because no one brought that to the attention. So the fact that understanding the physiological effects of your gear, whether it's old or new, is critical into that component too.
What I'm hearing is we need to break down the silos.
Without a doubt.
Oh my gosh, listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. And I think that AZ and Fernando are going to drop the mic. Thanks for your time today, my friend.
Thank you so much, AZ. You have a wonderful weekend.
You too.